London's tourist buses are running on empty. The sightseeing trips were back on the road this weekend after months in lockdown. For the operators, it's meant embracing new social distancing rules, so only half as many passengers as before coronavirus. But finding any customers is proving to be a challenge.
We typically be running about 50 buses on a sunny July weekend like this, and we ran a single bus and we carried a handful of passengers, and it's stark how empty the streets of London are.
That is not a sustainable business model.
It absolutely is not a sustainable business model, no, and we need people back on the streets of London.
The lack of crowds at one of the capital's prime tourist hotspots also speaks volumes. Rarely has a sunny July morning seen so few people outside Buckingham Palace. Not that there were any complaints from those who did venture out.
It's perfect to see all the things because less people is better.
I think because there's not a lot of people, I feel kind of safer because of like coronavirus and stuff like that. It's social distancing anyways.
I come from Frankfurt, Germany. I come to see, London. I'm visiting a friend here. I was on the first flight to London after lockdown.
We think it's great. It's places are opening, and we've had a great couple of days. It's been fantastic.
Today, London's tourist trade appealed to the government for help. Bosses of 45 tourist attractions, hotel chains and trade associations wrote to the Prime Minister on behalf of more than 10,000 London businesses. They want the government to extend the current business rates holiday until 2022 and to fund a global marketing campaign to get British and foreign visitors back into London. This cry for help from the tourist industry isn't just about businesses, it's about people. In a normal year, it's estimated more than 700,000 Londoners are in jobs which rely on tourists and visitors. The letter to the PM included a warning that London's tourism sector could sink to a place from which it cannot return without support.
Historically, London has welcomed 30 million guests into London, not only through the domestic market but international market, and these guests have spent £15 billion in the capital city. Without this revenue stream, our businesses will be struggling.
When it reopens, the London Eye will have fewer people in each pod and all of them wearing masks. They're still doing the maths to work out when that might be viable.
Simon, one of the big things about visiting London, I suppose, is do you feel safe? The government seems to be about to make an announcement on face masks. Could that help with this?
Well, tourist industry bosses certainly think fear is one of the factors putting off would-be visitors to London, so anything that might help would be useful. But at the moment, the message from the government is a bit hazy. Boris Johnson again wore a mask today when he visited London Ambulance Service and suggested people should wear them in shops and in confined spaces. But unlike on public transport, it's not compulsory. But the Prime Minister hinted that could change in the coming days. So would wearing masks be enough to convince foreign visitors that London is a safe place to visit? I guess that probably depends on whether you think the sight of everyone wandering around the streets of London with their face covered is reassuring or more alarming.
Yeah, who knows? Simon, thank you very much.
Good evening. Stop and search is a controversial tactic that is once again in the spotlight after a series of cases which have led to complaints. The Met Police has referred itself to the watchdog after the athlete Bianca Williams and her partner were pulled over earlier this month. But today, the officer in charge of stop and search once again defended the policy and its use as violent crime in the capital continues to rise with the easing of lockdown restrictions. Commander Jane Connors acknowledged, though, that trust with the black community remains an issue. She spoke to our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Wait, he didn't do anything!
It's a tactic which divides opinion and communities. Recent weeks have seen a succession of stop and search operations where the targets have felt victimised because of their skin colour. But the Scotland Yard officer in charge of stop and search argues it's a crucial weapon in the fight against violent crime.
Violence has been increasing over the last couple of years. One of the things we want to do is make sure that we tackle that, stop young people getting seriously stabbed and some people even being killed. So that's our primary role.
In the lockdown month of May, young black men in London were stopped almost 10,000 times. In more than 8,000 cases, no further action was taken. That means 1 in 10 young black male Londoners were stopped and searched and allowed to go, compared to just 2% of young white male Londoners.
A lot of the community do support the use of stop and search. The issue is that we need to make sure we do it properly and respectfully.
You can't be happy with that disproportionality though, can you?
As I say, disproportionality exists throughout the criminal justice system. And
That doesn't make it right.
It doesn't make it right, but it is a very sad fact that our job is to tackle violence. So the places that we put officers into, we put them into areas where there is high violence. And unfortunately, some of those are in areas where some of our BAME communities are.
Is stop and search a fact of life if you're a young black Londoner?
I think it's a fact of life that we're trying to reduce violence.
Do you accept there's a trust issue?
I do accept that there is a trust issue with some of our communities in particular, absolutely, and that is something that we welcome those discussions and to work on.
Earlier this year, a 21-year-old songwriter and music producer from North London was stopped and searched by officers from the Met's territorial support group, the TSG. His name is Young, and he believes the TSG is part of the problem.
It seems to be with the police and their forces that have a group called TSG, and it seems that they're far more aggressive than average police officers, and it seems that they abuse their authority.
Do they need to be less aggressive?
I think the TSG, because a lot of the time they work in the minibuses, so you will see them, they come in units with a sergeant and 6 officers, so potentially they can look quite aggressive because there's quite a lot of officers. But if you watch, they will have 2 officers get out to engage with the subject.
Is stop and search here to stay?
It is definitely a tactic that we need to use.
What's the best thing you can say in its defence?
We took 4,000 weapons off the street last year. Just in April, 384 weapons. That included guns, machetes, Rambo knives. The weapons are out there, and our job is to keep people safe, particularly the young black males who are often victims and suspects of this type of crime.
Well, Simon, as lockdown eases, violent crime seems to be going up.
Yes, there has been a spike in violence in the last week or so, with 3 people stabbed to death and 2 people shot in London in the space of just 8 days. It's perfectly clear from what Commander Connors told us today that the Met still has a lot of faith in stop and search, despite all the rows. She described it as a preventative tool, which does take weapons off the street. But it's equally clear from the very fact that she wanted to talk to us about it that the Yard knows it has a lot more explaining to do to make the case for more stop and search.
All right, Simon, thank you.
7 people have been murdered in the capital this month as an easing of lockdown restrictions coincides with an increase in violent crime. The most recent was in the early hours of this morning when a man was killed in Maida Vale. On Saturday, Jaro Shepherd, a mixed martial arts fighter, was stabbed at his birthday party. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has the latest.
He is the nightmare! He is Jay Shepherd!
In the toughest of sports, Jaro Shepherd had the makings of a champ. The MMA fighter from South London was on his way to the big time after putting a troubled past behind him. But on Saturday, someone stabbed him to death at his own birthday barbecue in Kennington. At his gym near Old Street in East London, his coach and training partner were swapping memories today.
He was like at an amateur level about 3 years ago, and in that short time he managed to become a professional with titles, and you know, he was ready to go to the next level, like maybe even reach the top, you know.
I have no doubt that he'd be able to be competing within a matter of years with the best guys in the world. He was definitely going there. There's no question.
He'd been in prison before and stuff, but that's when he turned his life around, and I think I met him at the best part of his life, when he had come out of prison and he knew what he wanted to do, and he said, like, I want to become a fighter.
Jaro Shepherd is one of 7 murder victims in London this month. 5 were stabbed to death, 2 were shot. In the latest, in the early hours of this morning, a man died after a knife attack in Maida Vale. He was found lying in a street close to a block of flats where key workers live, including police officers and nurses.
There was a black car that arrived where they were all dressed in black and hoods. One of them is the one who attacked the person who died. And there was big fight because there were 15 or whatever number. We've had this for a long time, we've been reporting.
It's a familiar story. People complain about antisocial behaviour and suspicious activity. Little is seen to be done, then someone dies. People living here are in little doubt about what they think is behind this latest killing. Persistent drug dealing after dark has become a menace in this street.
Some people, they're afraid to go out after a certain time, including myself. Nighttime, I don't go out, on foot.
No one has been arrested for this killing or for the murder of Jaru Shepherd.
And new super title under 77 kilogram champion, Jay!
At the end of last year, Jaru Shepherd had every reason to look forward to 2020. Instead, he's one of too many Londoners to fall victim to the deadly violence, which appears to be back after a lockdown lull. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Good evening. To her critics, Shamima Begum is a dangerous woman who ran off to become a fighter for so-called Islamic State. To her family and supporters, she was a teenage girl groomed by jihadists who have spent the last 3 years of her life in a refugee camp. The government took away Shamima's British citizenship, citing security concerns. But now senior judges have ruled she should be allowed to return to the UK in order to fight that decision. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has today's developments.
The floppy hat and jeans are not the traditional uniform of a jihadi bride, but this is Shamima Begum's new look. She was filmed today hurrying away from the camera at a camp in northern Syria. And this is her more familiar appearance. Shamima Begum's views on the British legal system are unclear, but suddenly she has good reason to thank judges in London, because the Court of Appeal says she can come back to the UK to fight the decision to take away her British passport.
What the court said was that she can't have a fair and effective appeal from the camps. So it's incredibly important that those principles are upheld so that she is allowed to come back here and properly challenge the decision that the government has made to deprive her of her citizenship.
Shamima Begum was 15 when she went to Syria 5 years ago to join Islamic State. 4 years later, her British citizenship was revoked after she was discovered in a refugee camp. Last autumn, her lawyers appealed the decision, arguing it left her stateless. If the government has its way, Shamima Begum won't be home anytime soon, despite today's ruling. The Home Office said the judgment was very disappointing, and the next step will be to ask the court for permission to challenge it. Shamima Begum, here on the right, was one of 3 Bethnal Green Academy pupils who ran away. This CCTV footage shows them in Turkey. The 2 other girls, Khadija Sultana and Amira Abbasi, are thought to have died, but Miss Begum survived the defeat of Islamic State. The government says she poses a threat to national security. Dal Babu, a retired chief superintendent who was involved in the case, thinks she's likely to be arrested if she returns to London and then questioned at length by the police.
They'll have access to a whole range of intelligence which they're not going to share with the public or make public, and she will have to go to due process, and part of that will be her to explain why she went, who she spoke to, what offences she may or may not have committed while she was out there.
Miss Begum's supporters claim she's a victim of grooming and trafficking. The government thinks she's a terrorist sympathiser. For now, she'll have to stay in the camp, which has become her home.
Simon, a day of surprising developments.
Yes, first that defeat for the government after judges ruled that fairness and justice must outweigh national security concerns. And then those fresh pictures of Shamima Begum in that floppy hat, trainers and jeans. When she was first discovered in the camps 18 months ago, dressed head to toe in black, she expressed no regrets about her time with the Islamic State, even saying she wasn't fazed by the sight of a severed head in a bin in the street. So this new look is bound to raise questions about whether she's trying to reinvent herself, perhaps to give the impression that she's de-radicalised in the hope of getting a more sympathetic reception if she's ever allowed to come back to London.
Simon, thank you.